The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the raw, chapped skin of her hands and claws that raked down her spine. Alara called it the hunger cold because it was sharpest when her belly was empty, which was always. She scrubbed at the great stone steps of the pack house, her knuckles bleeding into the icy water of her bucket. Each scrape of the brush against stone was a prayer that she might be allowed a crust of bread from the evening meal. They called her the ghost, the whisper, the scraps girl. Anything but her name. To be named was to be seen, and to be seen was a privilege Alara had never known. She was an Omega, an orphan left on the pack's doorstep as a babe, a constant, worthless reminder of their charity. Her existence was a series of chores performed in the biting cold, punctuated by the sharp words and sharper shoves of the others. A shadow fell over her. Alara didn't need to look up to know who it was. The scent of cloying winter rose and smug satisfaction preceded Lyra everywhere. "Still scrubbing, little mouse?" Lyra's voice was like honey laced with poison. A silver-toed boot nudged Alara's bucket, splashing the frigid, dirty water over her thin tunic. The cold shocked through the threadbare wool, stealing what little warmth she had. Alara flinched, curling into herself. "I'm almost done, Lyra." Her voice was a dry rasp, barely audible over the wind that howled through the mountain pass. "Almost isn't good enough," Lyra sneered. She leaned down, her perfectly braided blonde hair falling over one shoulder. "The Alpha King is coming. His procession was sighted an hour ago. Everything must be perfect, not stained by the likes of you." The Alpha King. The name was a legend, a thunderclap in their small, isolated world. Kale the Unbroken, the supreme leader of all the northern packs, a being of immense power, ancient and terrifying. Why would he come here, to their unremarkable crag of a territory? Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of her hunger. His presence meant disruption. It meant more work, more chances to fail, more reasons for punishment. "Get it done," Lyra commanded, her boot connecting sharply with Alara's ribs. Pain exploded in her side, forcing a gasp of air from her lungs. "And then make yourself scarce. No one wants to look at you." Lyra swept away, leaving Alara shivering on the steps, a fresh bloom of pain spreading across her torso. She gritted her teeth, pushing the tears back. Crying was a weakness, another sin in the long list of her failures. She would not give Lyra the satisfaction. She would finish her work, she would disappear. It was the only way she knew how to survive. She scrubbed until the stones were clean and her fingers were numb claws of ice. Then, as ordered, she faded into the shadows. She found a small alcove behind the kitchens, a space barely large enough for a stack of firewood, and huddled there, trying to draw warmth from the cold stones at her back. The wind sliced like a razor, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and something else. Something wild and powerful. Ozone and winter storms. It was him. The pack had assembled in the great hall. From her hiding place, she could hear the low murmur of voices, the nervous energy crackling in the air. Their alpha, a brutish man named Fabian, was trying to sound important, his voice booming with false confidence. Then, a new voice cut through the noise. It was not loud, but it silenced everything. It was deep as thunder rolling in a distant valley, a sound that resonated not in her ears, but in her very bones. Alara felt a tremor run through her, a strange primal hum that had nothing to do with the cold. Curiosity, a dangerous and foolish impulse, warred with her instinct for self-preservation. She had to see. Just a glimpse. She crept from her hiding spot, moving like a wraith along the shadowed walls of the corridor that overlooked the hall. She peered through a gap in the heavy tapestries, and she saw him. He was not a man. He was a force of nature carved into human form. Taller than anyone she had ever seen, with shoulders so broad they seemed to strain the seams of his dark fur-lined leathers. His hair was the color of a moonless night, pulled back from a face that was all harsh lines and predatory beauty. He stood with an unnerving stillness, a predator at rest, radiating an aura of absolute authority that made Alpha Fabian look like a yapping pup. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were not a normal color. They were molten gold, glowing with a faint inner light. They scanned the room with an ancient, weary patience, missing nothing. Alara felt a terrifying certainty that if those eyes landed on her, he would see every broken, worthless piece of her soul. She shrank back, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was a mistake, a terrible mistake. She should be in the kitchens, invisible, safe. Suddenly, a roar of fury erupted from the hall, so powerful it shook the stone beneath her feet. It was not the Alpha King. It was Fabian. "You dare bring this insult to my hearth!" Fabian bellowed. Alara risked another look. Fabian was gesturing wildly at a slain beast one of the king's hunters had brought as an offering. A snow leopard, its coat pristine white. A sacred animal to their pack, a creature they were forbidden to hunt. It was a grave misstep, an unintentional slight. The Alpha King, Kale, did not move. His golden eyes simply narrowed. It was a gift, acknowledging your territory's strength. His voice was calm, but the power coiled beneath it was terrifying. "It is an omen! A curse!" Lyra's father, a sycophantic elder, cried out. The hall devolved into shouts and accusations. Fabian, emboldened by his pack's fervor, took a step toward the king, puffing out his chest. It was then that the ground began to shake. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the Alpha King's chest, a sound that was less animal and more tectonic plate shifting. It vibrated through the floor, up Alara's legs, and settled deep in her marrow. The entire hall fell silent. Every wolf, from the strongest beta to the most arrogant warrior, dropped to their knees. Fabian, his face pale with shock and sudden abject terror, collapsed as if his legs had been cut out from under him. They were all prostrate on the floor, heads bowed in submission. All except Alara. Hidden behind the tapestry, she remained standing, frozen not by the growl's power, but by the sheer spectacle of it. And in that silent, submissive hall, her gasp was as loud as a scream. The Alpha King's head snapped up, his molten gold eyes, now burning with the intensity of twin suns, locked directly onto her hiding place. He saw her. He saw right through the tapestry, right through the shadows, right into her soul. Alara didn't think. She fled. Panic gave her speed she didn't know she possessed. She scrambled back through the corridors, her only thought to get away, to disappear. But the heavy doors to the outside had been barred for the king's arrival. She was trapped. She heard heavy, unhurried footsteps behind her. He wasn't running. He didn't need to. The sound echoed in the stone passage, a death knell for a worthless ghost. She found a narrow servant's stairwell and plunged down it, her bare feet slapping against the cold, damp stone. The stairs led to the cellars. It was a maze of wine racks and storage rooms, dark and freezing. She squeezed behind a row of massive barrels, pulling herself into the deepest shadow she could find, making herself small. She held her breath, praying to gods she didn't believe in. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd decided she wasn't worth the effort. The desperate hope was a painful shard in her chest. Then she heard the soft crunch of boots on the cellar's gravel floor. He was here. He was hunting her. The scent of winter storms and pine filled the enclosed space. It was overwhelming, primal. A faint golden light emanated from his direction, casting long, dancing shadows from the barrels. She could hear his soft breathing, steady and calm. He was toying with her. He knew exactly where she was. Alara's body trembled uncontrollably. This was it. This was how she died. Punished for the audacity of being seen. A worthless life snuffed out in a dusty cellar. The light grew brighter. He was just on the other side of the barrels. She squeezed her eyes shut, a pathetic whimper escaping her lips. A large, warm hand gently closed around her upper arm. The touch was not violent. It was firm, possessive, and it sent a bolt of lightning through her entire body. A fire she had never known existed erupted at the point of contact. A searing, white-hot heat that was both agony and ecstasy. She screamed. The world exploded in a flash of brilliant golden light. It poured from the point where his skin met hers, a supernova in the dark cellar. She felt a burning pain on her collarbone, as if she were being branded with a hot iron. The sensation was excruciating, overwhelming. Black spots danced in her vision. Through the haze of pain, she heard his voice, a raw, disbelieving whisper that was somehow louder than her own scream. You. Her legs gave out. She was falling, but she didn't hit the floor. He caught her, pulling her against a chest that felt as solid as a mountain. The scent of him enveloped her, dizzying and potent. The burning on her skin subsided, leaving behind a strange, pulsing warmth. She looked up, her vision swimming. His face was inches from hers. The predatory harshness was gone, replaced by an expression of profound shock, of terrified awe. His golden eyes were wide, the light within them swirling like a captured galaxy. Mine, he breathed. The word a vow, a claim, a prayer. Alara's mind, battered by fear and a pain she couldn't comprehend, finally surrendered. She fell into the darkness, the last thing she felt being the impossible strength of his arms holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She awoke to the sensation of softness. It was the first thing she registered. Not cold stone or a lumpy straw pallet, but the plush give of a feather mattress and the impossible weight of thick fur blankets. The air was warm, smelling of wood smoke and cedar. Confusion was a thick fog in her mind. Where was she? Was this some strange afterlife? She opened her eyes. She was in a large, richly appointed room. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth across from the bed. Heavy tapestries depicting ancient hunts covered the walls. It was a room fit for a king. Memory returned in a painful rush. The growl, the flight, the cellar, the touch, the searing pain. Alara sat up with a gasp, her hand flying to her collarbone. Her fingers brushed against raised skin, a pattern that felt intricate and strange. A mark. He had marked her. What was happening to me? The heavy wooden door opened and he walked in. The Alpha King, Kale. He moved with a silent grace that belied his massive size. He was not wearing his heavy travel leathers now, but a simple dark tunic and trousers that did little to hide the powerful muscles beneath. His golden eyes found hers, and the intensity in them made her want to burrow back under the furs. There was no anger there, no menace. There was something far more terrifying. A raw, possessive tenderness that she had no idea how to process. "You are awake," he said. His voice was still that deep rumble, but it was softer now, gentler. Alara could only nod, clutching the furs to her chin. She was a mouse in a lion's den. He crossed the room and sat in a heavy wooden chair near the fire, not wanting to crowd her. It was a considerate gesture, but the sheer force of his presence still dominated the space, charging the air with a tension that made it hard to breathe. What did you do to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A flicker of something, pain, regret, crossed his handsome features. "I did not mean for it to be so violent. I have been searching for centuries. I did not expect to find you here, like this." "Find me?" Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. I am no one. Just an Omega." The words were a familiar refrain, a shield she had used her whole life. His expression hardened. The gold in his eyes flared. "You are not just an Omega. Do not ever say that again." The command was absolute, leaving no room for argument. "You are my mate." The word hit her like a physical blow. Mate. It was impossible. A worthless, nameless scraps girl and the Alpha King? It was a cruel joke, a fever dream. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. You're mistaken. I am nothing." He rose from the chair and moved to the side of the bed. Alara flinched, pressing herself back against the headboard. He stopped, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "The bond does not lie," he said, his voice soft again. "The mark on your skin, it is a claiming mark, the sign of the soul bond. It appears only when I touch my true mate for the first time." He looked down at his own hand, then back at her. "I have waited 500 years for you." 500 years. The number was incomprehensible. This being, this ancient, powerful king, had been waiting for her? For worthless, invisible Alara? The idea was so ludicrous, so completely outside the realm of her reality, that a hysterical laugh bubbled in her throat. She choked it back, a sob taking its place. "I don't understand!" she cried, the tears she'd held back for so long finally breaking free. "I'm broken! I'm dirty! I'm not a queen!" His face softened with a pain that seemed to mirror her own. "What they have done to you is a crime I will see answered for, but it does not change what you are." He took a tentative step closer. "Alara." He said her name. He said her name, and it sounded like a song, a validation. In that single word, she felt more seen than she had in her entire life. He sat on the edge of the bed, his weight making the mattress dip. He did not touch her. "The bond connects us now. Can you not feel it? A pull, a warmth where before there was only cold." She focused, pushing past the fear, and she could feel it, a faint golden thread stretching from her chest to his. It hummed with a quiet energy, a sense of rightness that warred with a lifetime of being told she was wrong. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I feel," she started, but couldn't finish. How could she describe this? "I know," he said, and his smile was like the first sunrise after a long winter. "I have you. You are safe now. For the next few days, Alara lived in a state of surreal disbelief. Kale treated her with a reverence that left her constantly off balance. He brought her meals himself, simple broths and breads that tasted like the most decadent feasts. He had healers check on her, their gentle hands tending to the fading bruises left by Lyra and a lifetime of neglect. He told her stories of his kingdom in the far north, a land of silver forests and mountains that touched the stars. He spoke of his loneliness, of the centuries spent watching the world, feeling the absence of his other half like a phantom limb. He never pushed her, never demanded anything. He simply existed in her space, a warm, solid presence that slowly, painstakingly, began to push back the cold that had settled in her bones. But her mind was a battlefield. One part of her, the instinctual, primal part that responded to the hum of the bond, yearned to trust him. It craved the safety in his golden eyes, the promise of warmth in his touch. But the other part, the part that had been shaped by years of abuse, screamed that this was a trick, a fantasy that would be ripped away, leaving her more broken than before. How could anyone want her? How could this god of a man see anything in her but a pathetic stray? The pack was in an uproar. Alpha Fabian, humiliated and terrified, had confined himself to his quarters. The rest of the pack whispered in the shadows, their eyes following Alara whenever she dared to venture from the king's rooms. They looked at her with a mixture of awe, fear, and bitter resentment. She was still the Scraps girl, but now she was the Scraps girl who belonged to the king. Lyra's hatred was the most potent. Alara could feel it like a physical force whenever their paths crossed. Lyra's eyes, once filled with cruel amusement, now burned with a venomous jealousy that was far more frightening. One afternoon, while Kale was in a tense meeting with Fabian and the pack elders, Alara gathered her courage and walked out onto a stone balcony overlooking the valley. The air was crisp and clean. For the first time, she wasn't shivering. Kale had given her a cloak lined with wolf fur, and it was the warmest thing she had ever worn. She felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. Hope. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling. "Enjoying the view, Omega?" Lyra's voice cut through the quiet. Alara turned. Lyra stood in the doorway to the balcony, her arms crossed, her face a mask of contempt. "He will tire of you," Lyra said, stepping closer. "You're a novelty, a broken toy he thinks he can fix. But you are filth. And filth always gets thrown back in the dirt where it belongs." "Leave me alone, Lyra," Alara said, her voice stronger than she expected. Lyra laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what? You'll have your king punish me? He doesn't know you. Not the real you. The sniveling, weak thing that used to beg for my leftovers." She stalked forward until she was inches away, her gaze dropping to Alara's neck. The high collar of her tunic usually hid the mark, but a gust of wind had shifted the fabric. Lyra's eyes widened as she saw the edge of the intricate, glowing pattern on Alara's skin. Greed and a sudden, sharp cunning replaced the jealousy in her expression. "So that's it," she breathed, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "A brand. He owns you like cattle." She reached out a hand as if to touch it. Alara recoiled, stumbling back. "Don't touch me!" Lyra's smile widened. "Oh, I won't. But there are others who will be very interested to see the king's new pet. Others who believe his reign has lasted far too long." Before Alara could process the threat, Lyra turned and walked away, her hips swaying with newfound purpose. A cold dread, far worse than the hunger cold, settled in Alara's stomach. Lyra wasn't just being cruel. She was planning something. She had seen the mark not as a bond, but as a key, a weakness in the unassailable Alpha King. Alara ran back to the room, her heart pounding with a new kind of fear. It wasn't for herself this time. It was for him. She had to warn Kale. She burst into the antechamber of his suite, but he wasn't there. His guards, 2 massive warriors who had been assigned to her, stood by the door. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice frantic. "The Alpha King is concluding his meeting, my lady," one of them, named Gunnar, replied. His tone was respectful, but firm. He asked not to be disturbed. "But it's important. Lyra, she saw the mark. She said something." Her words tumbled out in a panicked rush. Before the guard could respond, a sudden commotion came from the corridor. Shouts, the clash of steel. Gunnar and his partner drew their swords, instantly moving to shield her. The doors to the suite burst inward, splintering off their hinges. Figures cloaked in black, their faces hidden by shadow and steel masks, poured into the room. They moved with a silent, deadly efficiency that was nothing like the brawling of pack warriors. On their chests, they bore the sigil of a smoldering ember. The Ember Covenant. A dark cult of assassins and shadow mages, loyal only to the one who paid them. Kale's guards fought with ferocious courage, but they were outnumbered. Gunnar went down with a black-fletched arrow in his throat. The other was overwhelmed, his life ending in a spray of crimson against the tapestries. Alara screamed, scrambling backward until her back hit the cold stone of the far wall. One of the assassins, clearly the leader, stepped over the bodies. He was taller than the others, and a chill emanated from him that had nothing to do with the winter outside. He pulled back his hood. His face was gaunt, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "The king's pet," the man hissed, his voice like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "Our Lord Morven will be so pleased. He has a great interest in you." Fear paralyzed her. She was frozen, helpless, the worthless Omega once more. The man lunged, and a rough burlap sack was pulled over her head, plunging her into suffocating darkness. Strong arms lifted her, and she was carried away, the faint, distant sound of Kale roaring her name the last thing she heard before the world dissolved into chaos. Consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from a deep, dark sea. Her head throbbed, and a coppery taste filled her mouth. She was lying on a cold, stone floor. The air was stale, smelling of damp earth and decay. She pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest. She was in a circular chamber, lit by eerie, green glowing crystals embedded in the walls. The stone was black, slick with moisture. In the center of the room, runes were carved into the floor, forming a complex and menacing circle. And she was alone. Panic seized her. "Kale!" she cried out, her voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. A new sensation made her gasp. A cold, aching void in her chest where the warm, golden thread of the bond had been. It wasn't gone entirely, but it was faint, stretched thin and taut, like a string about to snap. The distance, the magic of this place. It was severing their connection. The pain of it was a physical agony, a soul-deep loneliness that was infinitely worse than the cold or hunger she had known her whole life. "He cannot hear you here, little queen." The voice echoed from the shadows. A figure emerged, stepping into the green light. He was tall and unnaturally thin, wrapped in robes the color of dried blood. His face was handsome in a cruel, sharp way, but his eyes were pits of shadow, devoid of any light or warmth. This was not the assassin from before. This was the master. "Morven," she breathed, the name tasting like ash. "So, the king has spoken of me," he said with a thin, bloodless smile. I am flattered. He circled her slowly, like a wolf studying its prey. You are the key, you see. For centuries, Kale has been untouchable, his power absolute. But a soul bond. It is a source of immense strength, but also a profound vulnerability. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. His gaze fell upon her, filled with dismissive contempt. And you, my dear, are exquisitely weak. The familiar accusation, the label of her entire existence, should have broken her. But hearing it from this creature, this shadow thing, sparked something new, a flicker of defiance. What do you want? She asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. Want? He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. I want everything. Kale's throne, his power, the dominion he has held for too long, and you are going to help me take it. He gestured to the runic circle on the floor. This chamber is lined with shadow-forged silver, dampening your little connection. And this ritual circle will do more than dampen it. It will allow me to sever it. But not just sever it. I will corrupt it, twist it, and pour my own power back through the wound, directly into his heart. When his soul breaks, his body will follow. A cold, visceral terror washed over her. He was going to use her to kill Kale, to destroy him from the inside out. The thought of Kale feeling that agony, of their bond becoming a conduit for this monster's poison, it was unbearable. No, she whispered. I won't let you. Morven merely smiled. You have no choice. He seized her arm, his touch like ice, and dragged her toward the center of the circle. She struggled, but his strength was unnatural. He threw her to the ground, and her head struck the stone with a sickening crack. Pain exploded behind her eyes. Darkness encroached on her vision. Despair, absolute and crushing, threatened to drown her. He was right. She was weak. She was worthless. She had been a fool to hope for anything more. Kale was going to die because of her. The pain in her chest, the ache of the severed bond intensified. She curled into a ball, sobbing, lost in the abyss of her own failure. Kale, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She focused on the last frayed thread of their connection, pouring all her love, all her regret, all her desperation into it. A silent scream across the void. And then, a whisper in the deepest part of her mind. Not a sound, but a feeling, a warmth. Hold on. The voice was faint, strained, but it was unmistakably his. It was a lifeline in the suffocating dark. Alara, I am coming. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. He was alive. He was fighting for her. She would not let this monster win. She had to fight too. Morven began to chant in a guttural, ancient language. The runes on the floor began to glow with a sickly purple light. The energy in the room grew heavy, coiling around her, seeking to tear the last vestiges of the bond from her soul. The pain was immense, a spiritual evisceration. She grit her teeth, focusing on Kale's voice, on the memory of his golden eyes. She held on to the thread of their bond with every ounce of her will. Suddenly, a tremendous boom echoed from above, shaking the very foundations of the fortress. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The chanting faltered. Another crash, closer this time. The sounds of battle. The roar of a wolf, filled with a rage that could shatter mountains. Kale. Morven cursed, his concentration broken. He is a fool. He will die before he reaches this chamber." He redoubled his chanting, the purple light flaring violently. The pain in Alara's chest became a blade of pure agony. She screamed as she felt the bond begin to tear. Just as she thought she would break, the great stone door to the chamber exploded inward. Shards of rock flew through the air. And there he stood, silhouetted against the chaos of the battle behind him. Kale. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dirt and blood that was not his own. His golden eyes were blazing with the fury of a dying star. He was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had ever seen. "Get away from her," he growled, the sound vibrating with enough power to crack the very stones. Morven laughed. "Too late, old wolf. The ritual is nearly complete. Watch as I break your soul by breaking your pathetic little mate." He placed his icy hand on Alara's forehead, and a final, agonizing wave of dark energy slammed into her. The bond snapped. The world went white with pain. She heard Kale cry out, a sound of pure anguish that echoed her own. He stumbled, clutching his chest, his golden eyes flickering. The severing had wounded him, just as Morven had planned. Seeing him fall, seeing the triumphant sneer on Morven's face, something inside Alara broke. It was not despair. It was not fear. It was rage. A boundless, incandescent fury that burned away a lifetime of worthlessness in a single, glorious instant. He hurt him. He hurt my mate. The word echoed in her soul, not as a label given to her, but as a truth she claimed for herself. A power she never knew she possessed erupted from the core of her being. It was not dark and cold like Morven's magic. It was light. Pure, brilliant, searing light, the essence of a newborn star. It exploded out of her in a blinding wave, a concussive blast of holy fire. The light slammed into Morven, throwing him back against the far wall. He shrieked as it touched him, his shadow magic dissolving like mist in the sun. The purple runes on the floor shattered, the dark spell broken. The wave of light washed over Kale, and she felt it mending the wound in his soul, his golden eyes flaring back to their full, brilliant intensity. Alara got to her feet, her body thrumming with an energy that was terrifying and exhilarating. Light poured from her hands, her eyes, her very skin. She was no longer the ghost, the whisper, the scraps girl. She was a beacon, a storm of celestial fire. Morven scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "What are you?" he shrieked. "You called me his weakness," Alara said, and her voice did not tremble. It rang with the clarity of a silver bell and the power of an avalanche. "You were wrong." She raised her hand, and a beam of pure, concentrated light shot across the room, striking Morven square in the chest. He screamed, a high, thin sound as his body dissolved, not into blood and bone, but into dust and shadow, utterly annihilated by the power he had so foolishly underestimated. The light receded, drawing back into her. The chamber fell silent, save for their ragged breathing. The unnatural green glow of the crystals faded, leaving them in the dim light from the shattered doorway. Alara swayed, the sudden expenditure of power leaving her dizzy and weak. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. Kale. He pulled her against him, his face buried in her hair. She could feel the tremors running through his powerful frame. He was holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she clung to him just as fiercely. "Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled back, his hands framing her face. His golden eyes searched hers, filled with a love and an awe that finally, she felt she deserved. I felt it. I felt you. I thought I had lost you. You found me, she whispered back, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. The agonizing void in her chest was gone. In its place, a new connection was forming, not a thin, uncertain thread, but a brilliant, golden cord of light, woven now with strands of her own power. It was stronger than before, unbreakable. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss. It was desperate and claiming, a raw expression of relief and love and a promise of forever. She met his kiss with equal fire, pouring all of her newfound strength, all of her love into it. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Your power, it's like the sun. She looked down at her hands, half expecting them to still be glowing. I didn't know. They tried to extinguish your light, he said, his voice hardening with a cold fury directed at her former tormentors. They almost succeeded. He looked back at her, his expression softening again. But they made you strong, my fierce, brilliant mate. He gently pushed the collar of her torn tunic aside. The claiming mark on her collarbone was no longer just a faint shimmer. It was glowing brightly, a radiant, golden sunburst etched into her skin. As she watched, a matching mark began to burn itself into existence over his heart, a swirl of silver moonlight to complement her sun. The bond was complete, forged not just by fate, but by choice, by battle, by love. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her from the chamber of her imprisonment. His warriors, his entire army, stood waiting in the fortress halls. They had won. The Ember Covenant was shattered. When they saw her in his arms, the glowing marks on both of them visible, a collective gasp went through the assembled wolves. Then, as one, they dropped to a knee. Not in submission to a growl, but in reverence. They were not bowing to him. They were bowing to them, to their king and his queen. The journey north to Kale's kingdom was a blur of healing and discovery. They traveled with his honor guard, a swift and silent procession through the snow-laden forests. Alara no longer felt the cold. The light inside her kept her warm, a constant, gentle fire that was mirrored by the warmth of Kale's hand, which never seemed to leave hers. She was learning to accept the truth of what she was. A healer, a light bringer. The dormant power had been locked away by years of trauma and self-loathing, but Kale's love, and the threat to it, had been the key. She practiced in small ways, mending the wing of an injured bird, coaxing a winter blossom to open in the palm of her hand. Each act was a reclamation of self, a quiet defiance of the girl who believed she was nothing. Kale watched her with endless pride. He answered her questions, taught her about their world, and, most importantly, he listened. He listened to the stories of her desolate childhood, his jaw tightening with every casual cruelty she recounted, his rage a silent, protective shield around her. He made her feel that her past mattered, not because it defined her, but because she had survived it. One evening, they made camp in a sheltered cove surrounded by ancient, snow-dusted pines. The sky was a tapestry of deep indigo, littered with diamond-bright stars. The aurora borealis danced above them, a river of ethereal green and violet light. They sat together by the fire, wrapped in a single heavy fur. Alara leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the celestial display. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "This is my home," Kale said quietly, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "The Silverwood. And that," he pointed to the brightest star in the sky, "is the King's Star. They say it will only shine its brightest when the kingdom has both its rulers." Alara looked up at the star. It seemed to pulse with a fierce, steady light. "It's very bright tonight," she whispered. He turned her face toward his thumb stroking her cheek. "That is because you are here." His golden eyes held a universe of emotion. "My queen." The title didn't make her flinch anymore. It didn't feel like a lie. It felt right. Days later, they crested the final ridge. Below them, nestled in a valley carved by a frozen river, was his capital. It was not a crude fortress of rough-hewn stone like the one she'd left behind. It was a city of breathtaking beauty, elegant spires of white rock and dark wood reaching for the sky, their windows glowing with warm, welcoming light. It was a place of strength and grace, a reflection of the man beside her. As they descended into the city, the people came out to greet them. They lined the wide streets, their faces filled with curiosity and hope. They were his people, and they were as magnificent as their king, strong, proud, and with eyes that held a fierce intelligence. They looked at her, held securely at Kale's side, and she saw no scorn, no pity. She saw only respect. He led her through the city to the great citadel at its heart. They entered the throne room. It was a vast, cavernous space, its ceiling held aloft by pillars carved to look like ancient weirwood trees. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat 2 thrones carved from the same pale wood, inlaid with silver that seemed to capture the starlight. One was large and imposing, the other, smaller and more elegant, was empty. Kale led her to the dais. He turned to face his assembled court, his people, his warriors. His voice rang with power and a profound joy that echoed in the hearts of everyone present. "For 500 years, one throne has sat empty," he proclaimed. "For 500 years, our kingdom has had a king, but no heart. I have found her, our other half, the sun to our moon, the light to our long winter." He turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. His golden eyes were blazing, all his love, his history, his future laid bare for her to see. "Alara of the Silverwood, my mate, my soul, my queen." He led her to the empty throne and gently guided her to sit. As she settled onto the cool, smooth wood, a collective sigh of contentment seemed to pass through the room. The world clicked into place. Alara looked out at the sea of faces, her people. She looked at the magnificent man standing beside her, his hand resting possessively on her throne's arm, his eyes promising a lifetime of devotion. She felt the steady, unwavering thrum of their completed bond, a golden sun in her chest. The hunger cold was gone. The ghost was gone. The scraps girl was gone. In their place was a queen, a woman of immense power, a beloved mate. She was home. She was seen. She was loved. And for the first time in her life, her smile was not a ghost. It was a sunrise.